I also do like a make fighting against sickness. Switch over because they need more people in the middle. Keep the back of people's heads.
I don't know.
Right on your top. Exactly.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the CCI Diversity and Inclusion Week afternoon session. And the topic of this session is hashtag movement, social media, and the change. My name is Moon Hee Cho, assistant professor at the School of Advertising and Public Relations, and I will be serving as a moderator for today. So we have 5 great panelists who have really great professional academic experience and expertise, and then can share like various perspectives on this very timely topic. Before we get started, I want to encourage you to fill out the evaluation forms provided so that we can prepare like the next years. We celebrate 10th anniversaries next year, so I really encourage you to fill out the form at the end of the session. So now I would like to introduce our panelists. Let me start with Susan. So Susan Williams from the Highlander Center. Susan Williams has worked for over 32 years as a community organizer, a popular educator, and a participatory researcher and librarian archivist in East Tennessee. She has worked with Save Our Cumberland Mountains and the Tennessee Industrial Renewal Network, and now works at the Highlander Research and Education Center in East Tennessee. She coordinates Highlander's library, bookstore, and archive, and is a 2012 graduate of the UT School of Information Science Master's Program. And next, Brooke Bagley from Sexual Assault Center for East Tennessee. Brooke is a licensed professional counselor with the states of Tennessee and has worked with various capacity with the Sexual Assault Center of East Tennessee since 2010. She is currently a therapist program coordinator and oversees therapy functions for 2 programs that provides victim-based services, as well as maintain a caseload of the clients, facilitates the women's therapeutic support groups. She has specialized in training in regards to sexual trauma and interventions that helps address and minimize the effects of the post-traumatic stress disorder. Additionally, she works directly with the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force to provide shift wellness interventions, as well as individuals' therapeutic service on an as-needed basis to officers seeking to address secondary trauma resulting from the exposure to child pornography and other disturbing material. Yeah. Okay.
I never say how long this is.
Kimberly Peters person currently serves as a spokesperson for the Women's March Coalition of East Tennessee. Her previous career experience as a development director with nonprofit organizations such as United Way and American Cancer Society gave her a strong foundation for organizing special events. As a college student in the mid-90s, she engaged in many political protests and social justice movements as a member of the Students' Environment Action Coalition. Most recently, she had helped organize rallies in response to family separation, the Charlottesville tragedy, in support of DACA recipients. She is currently pursuing her master's degree in cultural anthropology at the University of Tennessee with a focus of the disasters, displacements, and human rights. She has a BA in cultural anthropology from James Madison University. In addition to being a AmeriCorps alumni, a member of the United Campus Workers of America and the Democratic Socialists, she also serves as a community outreach lead for Moms Demand Action for the Gun Sense in America. Dr. Shanita Destin is the assistant professor with the dual appointments in sociology and African studies who completed her doctorate degree at Howard University in the departments of sociology and criminology with the dual concentration in social inequality and medical sociology, as well as graduate certificates in women's study. Dr. Destin has taught race, class, gender courses at the James Madison University and Iowa State University. Her research highlights the unique way Black women are affected by state violence and the way in which they strategize, negotiate, organizing, leading, and caring for themselves and movement participants as part of their political practices. Last but not least, Ed Garnes, award-winning writer, activist, counselor, educator, and Atlanta native. Ed Garnes is the founder of From Afros to Sheltos, a community-based organization uniquely focused on cultural production that bridges generation gaps between youth, elders, and hip-hop community. Garnes has received Atlanta Tribune Man of the Distinction Awards, holds a BA in English writing from DePaul University, and a MA in counseling from Michigan State University. His seminal essay, Black Boy Blues Suite, a love poem to my father in E flat, appears in Anthology. Where did our love go? Love and relationships in African American community, edited by Gil Robertson. As a highly sought after commentator on hip hop, Black identity, manhood, and popular culture, Garnes has appeared on Young Black Entrepreneur magazine, BET, CNN's Headline News, Fox, My TV Network, Sirius Radio, CBS Radio, Black Enterprise magazine, and allhiphop.com. Garnes currently serves as a counselor for fellow at the University of Tennessee and stars in the acclaimed BET documentary film Killer Curves. His National Manhood Towards Sweet Tea Ethics has featured famed brothers Dr. Cornel West and Clinton West. Please join me in welcoming these great panelists. We'll have we have like approximately 40 to 45 minutes to cover the prepared question, and then the rest of the time will be served as a Q&A session. So let me start asking questions. Okay, what is your background and experience using social media? Do you want to start?
Yeah, I started. So I'm a sweet tea enthusiast outside of just my bio, right? So I was sipping sweet tea and trying to figure out when did I start using social media. And I have to go back to when email was first started. That's how old I am. When I first started undergrad, email was just getting started, and chat rooms became popular. So on the campus of DePaul University, I founded an organization called SCARE, because we were going to scare administration into change. It was called the Student Coalition for Awareness, Revolution, and Education. So using email systems, chat rooms, we started developing protests on campus, which led to more funding for Black organizations and student of color organizations, government evaluation committee working with the president to increase communication between students of color, because the diversity that you see now, hip-hop was just starting to be experienced by different races when I was in undergrad, okay? So Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, and people like that helped kind of move this diversity thing along as far as music. After college, I founded From Afros to Shell Toes, which essentially is an organization that is try to be responsive to the psychological needs of Black students, and also just being responsive to what's going on in the world. So another experience that I use social media, MySpace was popping at this time. All right, so I developed an organization called Katrina on the Ground. You may remember, some of you, the instances that happened in Katrina with the floods. So I was one of the founders of an organization that organized over 800 students to do an alternative spring break in Selma, Alabama. We distributed students throughout the nation to work on activist type initiatives, but I was responsible for really helping their psychology, and I was kind of like a counseling residence, because we focus on physical devastation, but as a therapist, I'm also in tune with the emotional and mental trauma that happens with that. More recently, I've used social media. I've done a social justice project at Pellissippi, so I'm always using, I was about to say MySpace again, shows you how old I am, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. But I will say I can't remember a time that I was not an activist, okay? I remember being in 3rd grade and challenging my professor on why I had to put race on the Iowa test of basic skills. So when social media happened, I was an activist first. So I think activism has to start within, and then the tools that you use change as technology and the world changes. I think you have to have it in your heart first.
So yeah, I think I would echo that. I think as a Black woman, it's not a space that you're in that you don't have to be active and inform folks differently about our different perspectives and things that we need to focus on. For me, I answered the question as far as my research and my experience with social movements. I see myself as both a person that is active online, in the street, and in my scholarship, right? Because I can't divorce who I am from all aspects of movement and activism. So I would say that I began researching the movement for Black Lives about 3 or 4 years ago, as also being a participant in that movement in DC and Maryland, to Ferguson and St. Louis, and on social media platforms. And I found myself as both an active participant in the street and protests around the country, and also as a researcher trying to garner like the significance of this movement and how it progresses till today.
Gosh, it's hard to add anything to that. I think I will speak mainly from the experience of the most recent activists, which is through the Women's March, and there really wouldn't have been a Women's March without social media. I don't know if you all know the history of it, but basically what happened was, after the results of the election of 2016, a grandmother of all things in Hawaii got on Facebook and was saying, oh my God, what has happened to this country and where are we going? We have a man who's actually declared that we can grab women by their private parts and still be president. And so from that post, it just started getting disseminated throughout the country and then throughout the world. And so without social media, the Women's March wouldn't have happened. And as we know, it was one of the largest social gatherings, social justice movements that is still going on literally as we speak. Women's March folks are in the offices in the Senate building protesting the confirmation of Kavanaugh and the vote on Kavanaugh. And so it has not stopped from that moment. I loved what you said about the activism having to be inside you. I think the thing with social media that's beautiful, what I've seen in my experience, I also came to activism at a young age, and back in the day when we didn't even have email. I'm probably older than you, but it has made it more available to a lot of people. When I was involved locally here with taking folks up to the National March in DC, as well as helping organize the one on campus and in Knoxville. But the beautiful thing about it was we had 60-year-old women who had never been out of Knoxville getting on a bus to go to DC to protest, never participated in a protest before, but were so outraged by what was going on that they just had to participate. And so I think the beauty of social media is that it is introducing it to your non-traditional activist. I think people have sat around, and the more that we're exposed to and the more we hear about, there could be this tendency to either just completely feel apathetic and overwhelmed, or it can really goad people to be involved. And so what I saw overwhelmingly, we're seeing, you know, people who have never participated in any kind of activism that were just, once they realized that there was this wave that was coming because they were hearing about it on social media, it's like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that feels this way. So I think that's the beauty of the use of social media, is it does really connect us and give us an outlet for that inner activism. So.
I mean, I can just say, echoing pretty much everything that they've said up to this point. I first had my social media with MySpace too. I miss the days when you can put like your little music on it and kind of make it personalized and stuff, writing code. But yeah, from my experience, it's been more of like a personal journey with activism. Working in victim services, it's kind of like a whole other angle, and then getting into the cultural diversity that also plays into and contributes to victimization has been immensely helpful in helping me to like better understand kind of day to day what life looks like for a large population demographic of people. I've kind of taken heed in being careful on social media myself, because I get very enraged and, you know, throat punch somebody verbally, which you can't do that because people won't hear you if you speak that way. So I've kind of made it like a personal bout at activism to kind of educate, you know, throw in statistics, link articles or research summaries that are helpful to help people try to get that information if they're willing to hear it. But also I stay very active with the Women's March. Any opportunity, we're doing the walkout today at 1, hopefully, and just kind of standing in solidarity where I can, not just because of what I do, but because of my own life experiences, and because I want to strengthen the world going forward. Because it's a double-edged sword to be so out there now with trauma. You know, we'll talk about that later, but a lot of support is what's needed to kind of move forward.
So I started working before computers, before cell phones, and so I was thinking a lot about this morning about what I've seen change. I worked in rural Appalachia for 10 years where people were really isolated, and so we used whatever we could. And so I feel like I've just seen the way we have tools and the importance of bringing people together and the ways we can bring people together, still face-to-face, still talking to each other, but also expanded to be able to reach out much farther. So I remember the first computer we got, email, started when I came to Highlander. Highlander is a place where people come together for workshops. So we build relationships with people working on issues. But I think social media has really helped people stay connected after they leave, build relationships, and build solidarity and overcome isolation, because people feel very alone and isolated even with social media. And I see that people coming to workshops really still need face-to-face communication relationships, but that social media can really help expand. So Highlander's institution, we have Facebook, we put out information, we've just been putting out information about how people can help with the hurricane relief with the communities in North Carolina. We do Facebook, Twitter, and all that stuff, and I think that sort of the thing is like, how do people build strategies and keep a core of leaders directly affected to lead, but then social media can go out and really connect people across the globe. So it's been an interesting journey, I think, to see what we need to keep and what we need to change.
See, think like maybe our second question could be combined with the third one. So, what do you see like some of the challenges or advantages of using social media to further a certain cause that you're pursuing? So can you start with Susan? Oh, okay. So what do you see some of the challenges or advantages of using social media to further the cause?
So I think that I think this has always been true, that to understand what really happens with the social movement in terms of what's underneath that's invisible. So I feel like social media gives this impression that suddenly millions of people can appear and something will change, and that's not really how it's ever worked. And so I feel like a challenge is really, if you want to make change, sort of understanding what's underneath and what is the strategies and what are people doing and how do you still pull people together. So that's what I feel like it gives people inspiration, but sometimes gives people the wrong idea of what is actually possible just through social media. And I think that that's hard for people to understand what organizing really takes, but that's really critical to actually making change that a movement is about.
So the way I read that question, I kind of framed that in terms of like what I see through the work that I do. And as I was saying before, it kind of feels like a double-edged sword with victim services. Because kind of what we're seeing is this phenomenon of triggering occurring because this has become such a hot topic that is everywhere. You can't turn on the TV, you can't get on the computer, you really can't do any type of social media interaction where you're not going to be kind of like pummeled with some type of focus on sexual assault. And so what's been great is it's been a platform for survivors to be able to have their voices heard, for them to kind of out themselves in a way that does have a little more protective space for them and to get that support. The other side of it is the other side of it. So there's still people that are going to have opinions about what they believe to be true or not true. We have cognitive dissonance theory playing itself out in social media everywhere in terms of like what a real survivor is, what a real survivor is not, what the perfect victim is. And so with that brings about another layer of, kind of re-victimization. So it's not just about this event that happened, but now it's also when you put yourself out there, you're giving thousands and thousands and thousands of people the opportunity to have an opinion on it. And so just from the view of kind of like what social media and the activism within the Me Too movement has created is it's been wonderful, but it also has consequences because we have to hear all the sides of it. And so we're kind of seeing that come into therapy more with people who are experiencing triggers later in life regarding their sexual trauma. So, and answering that question of why 30 years now, and it's because when we start talking about these things again, these issues will come about. They don't just go away because you've had 30 years of not having to deal with it. So
I think the advantages of it, especially what we're seeing, is the ability to do rapid response. That's pretty much what I feel like a lot of activism, the issues that I've personally worked on, it's rapid response. We're responding very quickly to things that happen. For instance, after the Charlottesville tragedy, everybody was sitting around just horrified, and it was like, what can we do, what can we do? And within 24 hours, we organized a rally just to come out and Knoxville down in the Market Square, we named it Stand Against Hate, and we just had about 600 people that came out just to say, look, we're not going to tolerate this kind of stuff in our country. This is not who we are. So I think social media, one of the biggest advantages, it does allow us to organize very quickly. You're able to get together stuff and react to something very quickly. The family separation issue was another issue that we actually were trying to organize a response to that. And we had 2 weeks, just from schedule-wise, we had 2 weeks out, and it seemed like it was forever. And we were like, is this even going to be timely anymore if we wait 2 weeks to have a rally? Which is crazy because, in the old days, you would plan things 6 months and all that. So 2 weeks, it just shows kind of the timeline of how rapid response is. So I think social media is great to allow us to quickly get out a response. But I think the danger in that is that which is something that we probably are addressed or was mentioned in the questions, is that people think that that's enough. Just showing up to a rally is enough. And, that's been a big challenge for us. In January, we had 14,000 people that showed up in Knoxville for the Women's March, and we were just overwhelmed. But keeping those people engaged throughout the year has been the biggest challenge, is that, you know, just showing up and holding up a sign is not enough. You've got to get plugged in to groups that are actually doing the work on the ground, and that's been the biggest role as we emerge, like post-March, is sort of what is our role and how do we do this? And we continue to use social media to try to build what we call an intersectional feminist movement. And social media also allows us to have those conversations where, for instance, you know, this last year, the pink pussy hat was the biggest kind of iconic symbol of the Women's March. As we went into Women's March 2.0, there were a lot of marginalized communities were like, look, the pink pussy hat doesn't represent me, because what if I'm a transgendered woman, you know, and I don't physically have those parts, like this is what this represents. So, you know, we needed to have these really tough conversations, and social media provided that, I think, a safe space in a way, because it isn't quite in your face. So we have a forum where people can talk about that, and people can say, but this doesn't, you know, this offends me, and you know, how do we feel about that? If we feel like people in our own movement don't feel like they belong, shouldn't we listen to that? And so there's a lot of conversation that goes on with that, but I think overwhelmingly the advantages are, you know, outweigh the disadvantages. I think there are challenges, but as long as you're aware of them and recognize and be honest and try to work through them, it's going to be a tool that we use forever. It's not going away. So.
Yeah, I think I would echo what everyone has said. I think social media could be used as a tool for raising consciousness. It could be used as a tool for organizing. It could be used as a tool for changing culture and shifting ideas and platforms, but to a point, right? And then work has to be done outside of that space. But I want to also give credence to the social media activism that takes place, that can sometimes be a lot of hard work and time put into it, to new social media moguls and Black feminist writers that have done this work of creating spaces for marginalized communities, and have also helped to bring all of their identities into conversations at the intersections of the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter movement, Time's Up, so that we could push platforms forward. What I would say the challenge is with social media is based on a Black radical tradition, is just knowing how the state interacts in that space. What does surveillance look like with Facebook and Instagram, right? So the FBI in its very beginning under Hoover in the 60s and 70s infiltrated Black movements, caused the Red Scare, folks being scared that these Black movements could be connected to larger communist movements, changed Black Panthers newsletters to change dates of when events were happening. There are still folks that are locked up on little evidence for political reasons, that are exiled in different countries 60 years later, and Black Lives Matter and other movements will have to really have some critical discussions of how to utilize social media with FBI that is 60 years grown, right? It's not in its nascent stage as it was in the 60s, and surveillance, I'm sure, looks very different after the Patriot Act, under this presidency where Black activists in particular are targeted once again, like the COINTEL program of the FBI in the 60s.
I mean, some good points, but I would say the positive that I see is that it equalizes the playing field, and allows all of us in this room or across the world to participate in instantaneous activism. But I do have a caution there, because we're living in an age where a click can change your life. for the better or for the worse. All right. We've seen more examples recently with racial issues. People calling the cops on black folks at barbecues. We've seen this in the media, right? So with social media, I say the caution is that tweeting and doing the things on social media cannot supplant education. And what is missing with social media is nuance, right? So you see all the issues in the world displayed on social media. You see unconscious bias. You see white supremacy. You see issues with LGBT getting acceptance. So all the issues play themselves out on social media. So social media cannot supplant education. And so as an African-centered therapist, as an educator who works as a TA for Multicultural Site, the emphasis on education, reading, self-development, or as Maslow would say, reaching self-actualization is important on your activism journey, because the more you're educated about the issues and educated about yourself, your social media will be more nuanced and more informed. So everyone plays a role. You know, I'm not trying to say there's a hierarchy on activism. I think a tweet, a flyer, a speech, all contribute to the main goal. But the caution is that we have to remain educated and vigilant, that we have to have boots on the ground supporting these things.
So based on your observation and experience and the pros and cons of the social media, so what do you think like the core relationship between offline and online activism?
I guess I'll start. I don't see a separation, right? So if the World Wide Web crashed today, there was no Instagram, there was no Twitter. I know some of y'all are like, oh my God. I would still be an activist, right? My grandmother gave me something in Vicksburg, Mississippi at that kitchen table. I remember my grandmother and grandfather discussing that they had to take exams in order to vote. So when those things are instilled into you in your mind in those developmental years, I have no choice but to be an activist, right? So with social media, there's also responsibility on what role do you want to play in change, right? And so when you look at social media, you have to figure out, you know, what your modus operandi is, or what's your MO, what are you using this for? You know, is it for the empowerment of other people? Is it for self-promotion? Or is it for the liberation of oppressed people? And for me, I would like to see social media, or how I use social media, is to effectively address issues with social class, issues with racism, issues with education. And I think that that's how I contribute and empower other generations with social media. But I think that it is a tool. And I think that the reason why I emphasize education, tools come and go. Your education, your mind, and who you are stays to an eternity. So that's what we have to do, is develop ourselves and just use those different tools as they come along. Because there was no, like I told you, we started with chat rooms. Email had just gotten started. So as technology shifts, our mindset has to be on core values of empowerment and just liberation for all.
So I agree with Edward. I think that education has to take place outside of social media as well. But I want to say that there are younger folks, there are folks that are across ability and different identities that may only be able to interact in social media spaces for various reasons. That's not where we have to stop. But that is, you know, their contribution, and I think any part of activism is a contribution, right? You share that tweet, you share that Facebook post, or where the march and the protest is going to be. That's important for organizing. And I think that's the connection. I think social media is a place where you kind of raise consciousness, you have these debates, you get alternative media sources, right? And sometimes information faster than the corporate media puts out. But then after you raise consciousness, then we have to have the education piece and long-term organizing that most times has to take place outside of that space for various reasons. And I think that the Women's March and also the Movement for Black Life and the organizers around it have shown us how to use this as a place to organize and lift consciousness and get folks together, but then been very careful about what is shared in that space and what also happens offline.
And I think a key piece that goes with the education is the building of the community, and that's what we need to do offline. I think in Knoxville, we have a beautiful social justice community that we have built that social media has helped facilitate, but I think if social media crashed or we did not have access, we have built relationships with the people so we would all show up for each other. And that's the beautiful thing, is that, you know, when we have, it doesn't matter what the issue is. You can see when we had the Families Belong Together rally, folks from Planned Parenthood were out there. It's not their issue, but they see the connectedness of all of these issues, that, you know, my liberation is your liberation, and we've built that community that United Campus Workers are gonna show up for the Muslim community. When the Muslim ban happened, there were folks out there, the DSA. So that's how I feel like we can take it to the next level, is that when we start to see these dots are all connected and that we're all connected and we build this incredible community and we continue to educate each other on our point of views and push each other to see beyond, you know, I'm focused on this because it affects me personally. But when we're able to have conversations and build community where we see that, don't you understand that the same people that are oppressing me are oppressing you, that's where the real beautiful social change happens, I think. And so that's how we can take it from social media online to offline, is by building that sense of community. And it's happening. And when it does, it's a beautiful, amazing, powerful thing.
Yeah, and just once again, more of that. And also too, just kind of keeping in mind that, you know, even when we're texting one another, the interactions that we're having are being seen through a filter. And so a lot of times that can get lost in translation when you're not having that human interaction, where we kind of remove social media from that a little bit. So I think while online and social media activism is great, I encourage that those face-to-face conversations also happen, and we continue that, because a lot of times, you know, when we are reading something in the mindset that we're in, we're going to give it kind of like a, you know, a flavor that may or may not be what that person's actually trying to address to us. And so just kind of keeping in mind and reading, when you're reading things online, to kind of keep that open-mindedness of, you know, how am I reading into this based on what this person's saying, and encouraging those conversations outside of that main mode of communication too.
To the question, I think to be successful, you have to have do both. But I was just thinking about people who don't have as much access. So there's still fights about getting access to strong broadband. There's fights about keeping the internet free, keeping it open access, and those are really important, because there's people. I just was talking to somebody at our homecoming who lives in a mountain community in Appalachia, and she cannot stream videos. Yeah. She has very limited access even now, and so poor communities in Detroit, people of color, rural communities really do not have instant access to all this stuff. We're at Highlander, and we have really struggled to have access and have to provide our own. But the fight for internet, keeping it open and free, is really real. And so there's a great website. It's called, it's through the Center for Media Justice, Voices for the Internet Freedom, and that'd be a great thing to connect to, because that's critical for all of us if we care about having access to this.
I feel like Kimberly a little bit touched on some of the negative connotation of the using social media activism, but some people fear that like encouraging activism via social media or online platforms might result in selectivism. Like in other words, like there are some concerns that like people might feel that they enough to participate in the activism by liking or sharing some of the social movement information. But what is your take on this? Like, I mean, it's enough. Some people, like young generations, are bombarded with so much information every day, and then just liking and then clicking information, and they feel like, oh, I'm enough. I'm activist now. So, what would be like a take on that kind of the negative concerns on the social media?
I guess I go. You know, I heard this expression when I was teaching at Spelman. Someone said they did not like armchair revolutionaries, and they were saying people that sit at home and click and like different things. It's like I was saying before, I think that all of that has its place, right? Because we're all at different stages of development, right? So for some people, sharing on social media, that's part of how they contribute to the activist tradition. But I think that we can't discount all forms of activism. Like social media is a form of activism, teaching is a form of activism. I think what's important is to develop, you know, our minds to be more educated on the issues that we are sharing. Like, for example, one of the drawbacks, I would say, slacktivism or armchair revolutionaries is that there's a sister, a black woman, Tarana Burke, who started using the hashtag #MeToo in 2006, right? You know, kind of got some headway. A couple of people might have shared it, but then you see white brothers and sisters in 2017, late 2017, also 2018, start using this hashtag #MeToo, and now it's a worldwide phenomenon. So what that shows me is that even with social media still reflects the landscape of America. So you have a diversity and inclusion issue, and what students have to understand, young people and people of different stages of development have to understand, is that social media can only do so much to address systematic change. You know, we still dealing with the fact that race is a social construction and what that means. So when we start talking about being a social constructivist and how we look at issues, social media can only go so far in doing that. But I think that where everyone benefits is that instantaneous access to information. Like, I give you one good example. I was in a story in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on experiences with racism that I've had as a black man in higher ed. Didn't think anything of it, did the interview, just supposed to be an online article. The next day, it was on the cover of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution because social media, people sharing it, people emailing it, so it can be used in positive ways, but I think that we have to understand its benefits and limitations.
Yeah, I would add one small thing. So I agree with all of that. Like, there's some systemic issues that we have to deal with, and that's part of the reason why I said we have to think about how the state is interacting with social media even today. But to use the word slacktivist, I really wouldn't go there just because there's different levels and stages that folks are at. That's not a stage that they could stay at to make some really radical changes, but sometimes that's just where folks are at and where they enter into social movements. So what I would say is that it has its place, right? But that can't be the last stop. And we have to remember that it's also a great time to be in that somebody could just tweet out like Black Lives Matter, and it starts to catapult a movement that has been going on for 5+ years at this point. That's no small feat, right? And I'm sure when Alicia Garza and Opal Tometi and Patrisse Cullors tweeted that out, they didn't expect it to develop into an international network, right? That has its flaws, being in a social media space sometimes, and deals with systemic issues of having focus on black women and black trans folks as well as black men as victims of police violence. But it's a place that birthed the movement, and we're living in a different time where social media is a tool. And if used critically, it can contribute more than I think we give it credit.
And I think too that we're underestimating what the power of a like is. I mean, if you come from a very conservative, right-wing family and you go and like the Rachel Maddow show, that's going to be a pretty big deal in your family. So I think that, you know, that could kickstart a conversation that really unpacks a lot of stuff in a quick, you know. I know I've experienced that with my family, liking certain things, and my family gets a notification of it. They're like, what? You know, what is this all about? You know, so I think that we're not given enough credit for that, and I agree, we don't need to stay there, but that could be a really big first step into it by just merely making a stand that, yeah, this is important to me, or I agree with this. You know, it can be a pretty powerful thing, so.
You know, I was thinking about how it's really hard for people, there's so many things I think about the system that makes people feel disempowered, that makes them feel like they cannot act. And so things that help people, give people hope is what helps people organize, besides anger and fear. And I think Black Lives Matter did that. It connected people who knew this issue for decades and decades and hundreds of years, but connected people and like, here's something maybe we can do, even. And so I think liking something can maybe open a window to you that is something maybe new for you that makes you, oh, they're doing this, so maybe I can do this too. So there's a lot to think about. How do we generate hope with what we share.
So let me open the floors for the questions. So if you have any questions to the panels, please raise your hand. And then
And it's just a mini question. What do you think?
Okay, we have one question on the floor here. Can you speak into it?
I have the floor.
Okay. Okay, you're next.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Is this not working? Okay,
No, it's
speak
not
up louder. Okay. Just go ahead and talk.
With all the activism on social media, you're going to get people, obviously you're going to get people who disagree and protest against that. And with that comes a lot of hate speech, which is a huge topic in social media, Twitter, Instagram. And there's Twitter, like companies like that are getting a lot of heat. Do you think the social media companies should take accountability, or do you think the users, like people, should start taking accountability?
Yeah.
I would say both. You know, I would say both, and like I'm one of the individuals that don't believe in censorship. You know, like I believe that people that dissent against my viewpoint should have their voices amplified, just as I have the right to amplify my voice. So I'm never going to be for censorship. But I think that we all, whether we're corporate owners or community citizens, have an obligation to regulate how we interact with our fellow citizens, brothers, sisters, whatever you want to call it. I think the obligation is on all of us.
Yeah, but what we are finding with a lot of like Black radicals on social media is that they are being more censored than the hate speech that they are receiving, right? So it goes back to what Edward was saying about these systemic issues playing out in the social media space, and Twitter or Facebook having like eminent domain to be able to kind of decipher which of those folks they're going to ban or kick off social media, and it's not without any preconceived notions. So I think that's also something to really think about.
Next question here.
So we talked a lot about the first time you guys used social media, but what would you say is the most successful platform that you guys use today in September of 2018? Like Facebook, Instagram.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm showing my age. I'm still stuck on MySpace. That was I would say Facebook, but I'm slowly merging into the land of Instagram. I would say Facebook, but I'm kind of getting into this Instagram thing. So.
And Facebook, I mean, I'm you know, it is a great social media organizing thing, but to reach your generation and younger, nobody's on Facebook. I mean, you know, Facebook's like for your parents. So we've got to get up with, you know, I mean, I think Twitter is probably something that most people, but then, you know, trying to conquer Snapchat and that world and how to use that is like, you know, beyond something of silly faces. You know, I think that's a good, so it'll be interesting to see if something else evolves, but, you know, Facebook has been, at least in our experience, the most effective because you can throw up an event and then people start sharing it in networks, and then that's what drives people to an event. But
When we talk about things going viral, you know, that can happen almost in a blink of an eye with the use of Facebook. So there's a lot of room there to get your stuff out there.
Well, one thing that does, as a library archivist, I also wonder, like, what happens with everything and how will we know what even happened? You know, I do worry, like, well, we'll record these important moments of history, and how will we know about the movement for Black Lives, and how will we know about the Women's March, and what will be the way that we will understand that in future years? So I do think about that as an archivist who's dealing with our own digital materials and all these changing platforms and changing ways information is. So I do think about sharing the stories of now into the future, and how do we do that?
Other questions? Ladies and gentlemen, we've got experts here.
It's a good question.
No questions?
Question. So what about using this tool, as you pointed out, for evil instead of good? What about Russian influencers or marketing things or people that are using these tools to slide in? I just saw you have the Memphis Police Department for having Bob Smith accounts on Facebook.
Yes.
Infiltrate groups and talk about what's going on there. We've seen all this stuff. I'm old enough that I got the original green card email. I mean, and I remember how aghast we were back then about somebody using our internet email for commercial purposes. It was some lawyers that were trying to sell their green card assistance services, and it was a huge outrage back in, I don't know, some other century. But
Yeah.
what do you think about that?
Well,
How do you deal
it's
with
so
that?
funny that you say that because we have, so we're planning for the next Women's March, and we've done the past two where the organizers were, and we, all of a sudden, we had this event thrown up, a Women's March event in Knoxville, and we can't find the origin of it, who posted this, and it's on the wrong day, and it's the wrong time, and we're like, we can't find out who the originator of it is, but it's getting shared by lots of people, and a lot of people that have attended our events and we're trying to go in and now manage, this is not our event, this is not us, you know, look for us, we're doing it on this day and this time, and more details. And so we just had, it's so funny because I had this conversation like 2 hours ago, and should we be paranoid and think that somebody's actually trying to sabotage, like getting us to come on the wrong day and all that? So it's so funny you asked that question, but yeah, I think that happens. And you know, fortunately, we do have a closed group, and so we are able to control the information that we're getting it out to those people to say this is not our event, and we don't know who has originated this. You know, stay tuned here. We'll keep you informed and all that, but. Yeah, I think that's happening. It's a real threat, and it's really freaky because you can't find out who it is. We're like, it's been put up by this group, but this group has no. It's like a circle, you know, and so it's like, and we've developed quite a white supremacist following. All of a sudden, we've got a huge fan club that shows up to all of our events lately. So you know, then there's. Is it this group, you know, are they trying to do stuff? So, yeah, I think that, and there's so much anonymity with online, so yeah, I think that's gonna start being a real threat to undermine social movements, you know, the trolls and the bots and the, you know.
There's a long history of it, like you were saying, right? There's long history, it's just another way to do it, so you should be paranoid.
I want to ask, how has the movements influenced voting in the past, and what impact will it have for the upcoming elections from your perspective?
So I remember before 2016, Black Lives Matter as a national platform didn't want to take a position on like who they would be, you know, endorsing for election. But now we see them taking a completely different route because of how the election turned out, and them realizing their influence and the ways in which they can influence their community. So what I know is that one of the founders has founded another group that helps to develop and support local folks that are going up, like Andrew Gilliam that just won the primaries in Florida. They were supporting that, and you also see, like you've seen in past movements, some of these young movers and shakers now moving into local political offices and transferring their knowledge of organizing into that space. So I see the movement changing its stance and trying to have a real effect politically, but also still holding on to some of its core values to just organize outside of these spaces in order to make social change from the outside to in.
Well, I'm from a small town called Atlanta, Georgia. But in the state of Georgia, I think that social media has had an impact on the governor's race. We have an African-American woman by the name of Abrams who won the Democratic nomination for governor in the state of Georgia. And I think a lot of that had to do with young people, intergenerational mix of people using social media and other platforms. It's led to her being, I think, on the cover of Time magazine. She's done a talk show circuit. That's all from the push of social media. So I think that if she does become governor, I think that she'll have to credit social media and its influence with helping to pave the way for them.
Other questions, ladies and gentlemen? No other questions? Oh my gosh, this is a quiet group here. Okay. Again, how many of you guys participate on social media? Let me raise your hand. How many of you are using it well? How many have made them, you've used it and you pushed that button, then you wish you could take it away? No, don't even show. Well, I guess I'll wrap it up. I'm Alice Worth, Chair of Diversity Inclusion Week. And ladies and gentlemen, we have a group of people, from directors to students to faculty member, as Dr. Moody, that meets on a regular basis trying to come up with each year topics. And this is a very important topic, and we try to say what's relevant, what you need. So don't forget the evaluations, those who are leaving. But I do want to thank our distinguished panel, Susan Williams, Brooke Bradley, Kimberly Preston, Janita Destin, Edward Barnes, Dr. Moon, our faculty members who brought students today. Give a round of applause. And you. Okay. We do do this evaluation, but let me just tell you, we have an important week coming up. Tonight, starting at 4:30 in the lobby, we have a reception, and we will have a keynote person, Allison Bethel McKenzie, and she's a very